When a federal judge stands up against their own colleagues and openly states that the legitimacy of the judicial system is at risk, something far greater than a mere judicial decision is unfolding. This is not just another political dispute between Donald Trump and his opponents. It is a reflection of a system that is gradually revealing how far it is willing to go to keep a former president, and everything he represents, out of the way. The recent case in the Ninth Circuit, one of the most influential courts in the United States, laid bare the division and manipulation within institutions that should serve the law, not ideology. 2 Trump-appointed judges voted to allow him to maintain the presence of federal troops in Portland, a city that had been the stage for months of violent protests, vandalism, and chaos. Up to that point, it was a decision within the bounds of the law. But the reaction to the vote, especially the fiery tone of Judge Susan Graber's dissent, a Bill Clinton appointee, revealed something much deeper. A growing fear within the judicial elite that Trump might regain control of the narrative. Graber, known for her moderate stance, completely broke from the expected tone of a judge. Instead of making a technical argument, she appealed emotionally. She claimed that the very legitimacy of the judiciary was at stake and called for the entire court, all 29 judges of the Ninth Circuit, to act immediately to overturn the decision. In other words, a judge publicly urging the entire court to mobilize to prevent Donald Trump from exercising legitimate presidential power. Coming from a magistrate who should uphold judicial impartiality, this is telling. But what is most alarming is what lies beneath this rhetoric. Graber and her allies are not concerned with the Constitution or the limits of presidential power. What frightens them is the possibility of Trump proving that a president's authority can indeed be exercised firmly, even when it displeases the progressive elite. Sending troops to Portland was not an authoritarian act, but a response to months of disorder, destruction, and attacks on federal agents. While Democratic mayors stood by, Trump made a decision any responsible leader would have made to restore order, and for that, he was attacked. The irony is that the very judges now trying to block Trump admitted in their ruling that Portland was never a war zone. Yet they argue that the president has no right to act, even as the country faces chaos. It's as if they are saying, "We know the house is on fire, but you can't use water because it's not politically convenient." The level of contradiction is absurd, and in her dissent, Judge Graber even mocked the protesters, mentioning their bizarre fantasies and protests, only to later treat it all as a legitimate form of democratic expression. At its core, what she revealed is a fear of strong government, a fear that Trump might reimpose authority, law, and respect in a country being eroded by anarchy and institutional hypocrisy. When a judge calls her own colleagues accomplices in a collapse of legitimacy, she is really saying that the system is only legitimate when it serves the interests of the right group. And that is precisely what is destroying people's trust in institutions. This legal battle is about more than just Portland. It's a mirror of the cultural and political war consuming the United States. On one side, a movement that believes in order, security, and sovereignty. On the other, an elite that would rather see the country in ruins than allow Trump to represent the people again. Graber's warning, far from being a call for justice, sounds more like a cry of desperation from someone who feels control slipping away. Because deep down, she knows that millions of Americans are waking up, seeing what lies behind this farce of legality. And when the people decide to react, not even the courts can hold them back. What makes this episode even more revealing is how quickly the political and legal establishment aligns when it comes to containing Donald Trump. Those who turned a blind eye for years to street violence, attacks on police, and the destruction of monuments now call themselves defenders of the Constitution when the former president tries to restore order. It is the perfect portrait of inverted values. When disorder serves the left's interests, it is called peaceful protest. When someone tries to impose discipline, it becomes authoritarianism. Judge Susan Graber embodies this paradox. In her dissent, she did more than disagree with the majority decision. She turned the court into a political stage. Her words, inflammatory and dramatic, spoke less of law and more of activism. She urged the court to act quickly to overturn the decision, allowing Trump to keep federal troops in Portland, claiming that the legitimacy of the judiciary was at risk. The problem is that her own behavior is what undermines that legitimacy. Because when a judge acts as an activist, justice loses what is most sacred, neutrality. Meanwhile, the two Trump-appointed judges, ironically the only ones who strictly adhered to the law, were accused of politicizing the decision. It is almost grotesque. Those who follow the constitutional text are labeled radicals, while those who distort it for convenience are celebrated as heroes of democracy. It is the portrait of a country that has lost its sense of proportion. But there is something even more dangerous at stake. The Ninth Circuit's majority decision recognized, for the first time, that the president has the authority to act when local forces fail. It seems obvious, but not to the left. They want to turn every act of authority into abuse, every attempt to restore order into a threat to democracy. The result is a country paralyzed by fear of action. While judges, governors, and mayors play political chess, the streets continue to burn, people remain unsafe, and the state seems to exist only to protect criminals and punish those who work. Judge Graber tried to ridicule the protests by mentioning chicken costumes and inflatable frogs, but the truth is that those protests were no joke. They were weeks of vandalism, graffiti, arson, and assaults. Images showed public buildings under attack, flags being burned, and police being harassed. The federal government had an obligation to act, and Trump did. He did what any president with a backbone would do, protect his country when local leaders failed. What the court's decision revealed, therefore, is not just a dispute over troops, it is a battle over who runs the country. The left wants a decorative president, bound by technicalities and submissive to the whims of the press. Trump showed that a president can govern in earnest, and that is unacceptable to those who thrive on chaos. When he tries to fulfill his duty, the entire system rises up, using judges, headlines, and narratives to sabotage him. This manipulation is not confined to the courts. It spreads through the media, political parties, and even universities. Everyone repeats the same mantra: Trump threatens democracy. But no one mentions that it was Democratic administrations that left entire cities at the mercy of violence. No one remembers that the same politicians who criticize the deployment of troops are the ones who call for police reinforcement when their own homes are surrounded by protesters. The hypocrisy is so blatant, it has become routine. And there is a detail few have noticed. On the same day the Ninth Circuit issued its ruling, the case was already before the Supreme Court, brought by National Guard veterans and Marines. Men who served their country and now warn that this kind of political manipulation will destroy the military itself. They know what is at stake. If the power to use the National Guard is treated as an ideological toy, the country loses not only authority, but its soul. These veterans, in their letter to the Supreme Court, were direct. Allowing a president to be prevented from acting for political convenience creates the image of a military force subservient to partisan agendas. This erodes the spirit of neutrality and patriotism that has always characterized the American armed forces. And what is most concerning is that this process is not accidental, it is intentional. It is an attempt to turn the military, justice, and even public safety into instruments of political control. The Portland case is just a symptom. The real diagnosis is a system in moral collapse, where right has become wrong and wrong has become virtue. Trump is the visible target, But the attack is against the principle of authority, against a country's right to defend itself from the very chaos the left helped create. What we see today is the portrait of a country being dismantled from within, not by foreign forces, but by its own institutional guardians. When a federal judge publicly urges her colleagues to act quickly to overturn a decision, she is not defending the law. She is trying to impose a political narrative. She is saying, between the lines, that justice is only valid when it favors the right group, and that is what destroys the trust of the ordinary citizen. People look at decisions like this and realize what has always been denied. The system is not neutral. The system has chosen a side, and the side it has chosen is the one that sees Trump as a threat. Not because he broke the law, but because he showed it is possible to govern without asking permission from the elite. Trump, with all his flaws and excesses, represents something the establishment fears deeply: independence. That is why every action of his is treated as illegal. Every word is amplified as dangerous, and every decision is attacked with almost religious fury. The Portland case is symbolic because it exposes the hypocrisy of the left. For months we watched American cities being destroyed, stores looted, police assaulted, and monuments toppled, and the silence was total. The press called them social justice demonstrations. When Trump decided to act, when he tried to protect federal property and ensure the safety of civilians, he was accused of militarizing the streets. And now, when the judiciary recognizes that he had that power, a sector of the judiciary itself rebels, claiming the decision threatens the legitimacy of the court. The absurdity is so great it would be comical if it weren't tragic. Meanwhile, the ordinary citizen watches helplessly. The taxpayer, the worker, the believer in order and law, realizes that the country is being governed by an elite that considers itself the arbiter of truth. An elite that uses the words democracy and rights as a shield, but is the first to trample both when things don't go its way. This is the real threat to America, not Trump, but the system that prefers chaos to legitimate authority. Judge Susan Graber said in her statement, "I ask that those who witness this case keep faith in the judicial system for just a little while longer." This sentence says it all. She acknowledges, albeit unwittingly, that the people have lost faith. And they have lost it for a simple reason: the system has stopped serving the truth to serve ideology. She asks for patience, but what Americans are asking for is justice, not justice in robes, but real justice, the kind that protects the citizen and punishes the criminal, regardless of who is in power. And the most ironic thing is that deep down she is right about one thing: the legitimacy of the system is indeed at risk. But not because of Trump, because of judges, prosecutors, and politicians who treat the Constitution as a partisan pamphlet. When a court acts out of ideology, the state ceases to be a nation of laws and becomes an arena of interests. And when that happens, the people lose respect, lose fear, and begin to see that something is rotten in the structure that should protect freedom. Trump's call for order and security is not an authoritarian whim. It is an instinct for national survival. The country needs law, discipline, and patriotism, not courts that confuse justice with activism. The president who had the courage to confront chaos is being judged by those who feed off it. And that explains the hysterical resistance from so many sectors against any attempt to restore authority. What lies ahead could be decisive. If the Supreme Court yields to political pressure and follows the line of those who treat presidential power as a threat, the United States will be closer to moral collapse than ever before. But if it has the courage to reaffirm the principle of authority, it could reignite the trust of a people who feel betrayed. The Portland case will pass, as so many others have. But the mark it leaves is deep. It showed that justice, when dominated by ideology, ceases to be justice. It showed that the system, when driven by fear of one man, is incapable of serving an entire nation. And perhaps that is the point Judge Graber will never understand. The problem is not Trump. The problem is the system trying to prevent him from governing. And the more they try to take him down, the clearer it becomes who is truly threatening democracy.